This is a good story. This is a good story today. Okay. Yokoso o ashitare. That's my best attempt at translating welcome in classical Japanese. Hopefully some of you people who are smarter than me don't go and ruin it for everybody and tell me what it actually is in the comments. That would just be terrible. Anyway, story time. So today's story is actually very exciting. I've been looking forward to this one because we get some action. Finally, some sword fighting and manly steel against steel and muscle quivering against muscle, and that might... Please don't get any weird ideas. Once upon a time, there was a man by the name of Tachibana no Norimitsu. He's basically the only person named in this story, so you don't have to worry about any other names. Tachibana no Norimitsu. Jeez. Anyway, he was a former governor of Michinoku, which was a province that was way out in the boonies. Nobody even really cared about it. Some people even argued if it was part of the Japanese imperial state at the time or not. And he wasn't technically a warrior. He wasn't from a warrior clan, but he was pretty badass regardless, as you will see. He did have a reputation for being strong and brave, and all of the men of the palace, all of the men of the capital thought he was a pretty swell dude, and they tipped their hats to him. All of the women swooned over him. He had a pretty good reputation for being not only just strong and brave, but also just a good guy. He was a great guy. But one day when Norimitsu was still a strapping young lad, he was out and about one night having a grand old time with a lady friend of his. But if you've seen the other videos, you may know from Japanese custom, the men, after spending a night with their lady friends, were supposed to leave before daybreak and skedaddle out of there before anybody could find them enjoying themselves with ladies. And so that's what Norimitsu did. Sun wasn't quite up yet. He wanted to skedaddle a little bit early. So he was out and about on his way home from having a good night with a single page boy. No retinue, no horse, no carriage, no entourage, just him, a page boy, and a trusty sword that he had at his side. And he's walking along the path. He's actually headed south, which the moon was actually in the west at this point, and it was shining very brilliantly. It was a very beautiful moon, probably one of the reasons why he was enjoying that night in particular. But he was walking by the Imperial Palace. Now, he wasn't in the Imperial Palace. He wasn't inside the grounds, but the Imperial Palace was surrounded by this huge fence, this really tall fence. And on the other side of the road that he was walking on was another big fence that was probably the fence to some other nobleman's fancy home in his estate. So he's walking down the road at night. The moon is shining bright. That rhymes. When he notices that in the shadow of the big fence surrounding the Imperial Palace, there's a group of people, a group of men. And that's immediately suspicious, because the only people who are going to be loitering around in the shadows at night are ne'er-do-wells, bandits, people looking to relieve noblemen like himself of their valuables. But because Norimitsu couldn't actually see, he didn't know for sure that that's what they were. He just assumed because nobody else would have reasons for being out like that. And so as he's passing by, he's praying that they don't notice him and his page boy. He's praying that they just let him go, that nothing happens, until, of course, one of them shouts, Hey, you! You're in the presence of a very noble person. You're in the presence of a very notable man. You cannot pass through here. Stop where you are. Criminal scum. Oblivion reference. Which was actually a blatant lie. There was no carriage around. There was no incense. There was no entourage of people. There was no noblemen around. Clearly. This guy was just trying to get him to stop so he could probably shake him down for all of the cash in his wallet or his sword or his fancy clothes, because those sold for a lot of money. So Norimitsu, looking at the opportunities or the options to him, he just goes, oh crap. And he just instantly takes off running straight, because he had already come a little bit too far for it to make sense to turn around and run back the way he came. So he just started sprinting off in the same direction that he was going. And then one of the guys from this shadowy group just turned to him and said, Oh, you think we're going to let you leave like that? You think you can just up and run away, do ya? And he immediately starts taking off after Norimitsu. Now, as the dude came out of the shadows and into the moonlight, Norimitsu did turn around to take a look at him to see who he was dealing with. And to Norimitsu's relief, the guy didn't have a bow and arrow, which was good for obvious reasons. I mean, good luck trying to outrun a bow. But he did have a sword, and that was a bit of a problem, much less of a problem than a bow, but, still a problem. But this man is chasing Norimitsu. They're running down the street, and Norimitsu can't really go anywhere because he's hemmed in by the fences on either side. When he suddenly gets the idea that as the dude gets close to him, he springs to the side. Now, I couldn't fully understand the description that was given in the original story, but essentially Norimitsu springs to the side, and I'm assuming in like the shadow, because the guy wasn't expecting this. And before he could stop or do anything, Norimitsu had turned around and he brings his sword. By the way, this is going to be a little bit grotesque, not crazy, but a little bit grotesque, fair warning. And he brings his sword right down on the guy's head, splits his head in two. Boom. Guy falls over, completely dead. So Norimitsu, having just sprinted a little bit and probably flushed with adrenaline, he just takes a minute and goes, okay, that went well. And just as he says this, he hears another voice. Yo, what do you think you're doing? And another dude comes running straight for him. And Norimitsu just goes, F, and he just takes off running again. And as this new bandit is chasing him down, he apparently runs by his now dead companion, sees what's happened, and thinks, oh, you think you're tough, do you? Well, let me show you tough. Sorry, that was a little weird, but I don't know how else to act. I'm bad at acting. Give me a break. So this other guy is chasing Norimitsu, and now it's a repeat of the last time. Except this second guy was a little bit faster, and Norimitsu didn't think he could get away with the same trick twice. So instead what he did is he waited until this guy was right on his heels, right up against him, and he suddenly hit the dirt. He just curled up into a ball. I don't know how he stopped so fast, but he just curled up into a ball, and the guy just trips right over him, just and goes sprawling, tumbles flat, face down on the ground. And Norimitsu, just like the last guy, takes a sword. I'll use my fan. Impromptu. I'm like a no theater player. Anyways, he brings his sword down right onto the dude's head. Splits his head in two. The guy is dead. And again, Norimitsu has now gone on 2 sprints and killed 2 men and is probably doubly flushed with adrenaline now. Just, okay, that's it, right? We're done. It's over. And he's just hoping. He's hoping to hope. Until a third guy comes running out. You think you're tough, do you? I'm not going to let you get away with that. Blah, 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 blah. Whatever bandits say when they're getting their butts kicked. And this time Norimitsu's like, oh no, I'm tired. I'm kind of hurting from a guy tripping over me, and I think my luck's running out. So please, oh gods and Buddhas, I need your help for this one, please. So he says a little prayer. So as this new bandit comes running straight to him, Norimitsu decides that instead of running this time, he's going to stand and face this guy, just straight up. And the description in the story says he holds his sword like a spear. And from reading an explanation of this, what it essentially came down to is that at this time, Japanese swords were curvier than the more typical Japanese sword that we all think of, the katana. And as such, they were not so good at thrusting so much as they were at slashing. And so the explanation says that he's holding the sword out in front of him, but instead of taking a pose getting ready to slash, he's holding it like he's ready to stab. Maybe like this, maybe like this. I don't really know which one it went with. But he's standing his ground, just holding his sword like this, ready for this guy to come at him. And the guy does come at him. And normally, I'm assuming what would happen is, because these swords are a slashing weapon, you're going to want to like step out of the way and not get slashed. But instead of stepping to the left, to the right, or stepping back to try to just make some space, Norimitsu steps forward into the guy, and he closed the gap. And because they're so close now, the guy, he takes a couple slashes, but he can't even get Norimitsu's billowy sleeves, his billowy clothing or anything. But Norimitsu, because he was holding his sword in such a way, stabs the guy clean through all the way up to the hilt. And then with one powerful pull, he yanks the sword out of the dude's chest, and as he's falling, he cuts his arm off. With one good cut, the guy falls down dead. And this time, Norimitsu didn't stick around to see whether or not he was going to get attacked by anybody else. He just takes off running again. And he ducks into a gate, a nearby gate, for a little bit of shelter, and he leans on a pillar to catch his breath for a second. But he heard nothing, so hopefully that was the end of it. But now that he's safe and he has a minute to gather his thoughts, he immediately starts thinking, uh-oh, what happened to my page boy? And he sets out to start looking for the kid. Now, in the scuffle, the kid had actually turned around and ran back the way that they came. And luckily for him, these thugs didn't seem to give him any mind. They were more interested in stealing the clothes off of Norimitsu's back, because he obviously was the one who had all of the fancy things. But after wandering the streets a little bit, he finds this kid. And, of course, this kid is, shall we say, distraught. He's sobbing. He's just wandering. He doesn't know where to go. He just saw this terrible thing. He thought he was going to die. He's just broken. He's traumatized a little bit. So Norimitsu finds this kid, pulls him aside, and takes a minute to calm him down, and tells the kid, hey, look, I know you've just been through a lot, but I need you to go back home and I need you to grab a new change of clothes for me. I'm covered in blood and I don't want to be seeing in all of this, okay? Can you do that? He sends the kid off running, and while the kid's gone, getting a new change of clothes, he takes his sword, he cleans it off. I don't know with what, doesn't mention, maybe his own robes that he's about to get rid of. And then when the kid arrives, he changes his clothes, gets all prettied up, and he and this kid go home and they act like nothing had happened. He swore the kid to secrecy too. Don't tell anyone about what just happened. But all night long, Norimitsu's sitting there worrying. He's worrying. He's thinking, did somebody see me? Did somebody know what's going on? Am I going to have to deal with the fallout of this whole thing? And so he didn't sleep at all night long. And sure enough, morning comes and the city erupts in gossip because 3 big, burly dead dudes were just found right outside of the Imperial Palace. So everyone's talking. Who could have done this? Who were these guys? Who was the guy who killed them? You know, gossip. This is newsworthy stuff. Some people wondered if it was just one single crazy swordsman who got him. Some people wondered if these guys were done in by a rival gang, by a rival mob. Some people wondered if they had gotten into a fight and they had killed each other. But from the looks of it, it looked like, given the way that they had died, it was all done by one person. But of course, this gossip reaches the nobility as well. And the noblemen hear about this, the young noblemen, and they want to go see. They want to go see what all the hubbub is about. This is crazy. So they come to Norimitsu and they're like, bro, did you hear? 3 dudes were found dead just outside of the Imperial Palace. Must have been some crazy swordsman. We got to go see. Do you want to come see? You want to come see? And Norimitsu, quite frankly, he did not want to go see. But he felt like if he declined this invitation, that it would end up making him look more suspicious. Like, bro, why don't you want to come see the 3 dead people? Isn't that something that everybody likes to do? Again, ancient Japanese morals and values, not the same as ours. So Norimitsu hopped into a carriage with him and all his buddies, and they take off to the Imperial Palace to go see the sights. To go see the site of dead men. And when they got there, Norimitsu noticed that the bodies had not been moved. Nobody had messed with them. They were right where he left them. And there were a bunch of other carriages all around because, again, this was newsworthy stuff. Everybody wanted to come see what had happened. This doesn't happen. And especially if you're a nobleman or a noble lady, where your life is usually pretty boring because all you do all day is write poetry and maybe sign documents or whatever and cry about everything. This was something big. This was the spice of life. This was variety. But anyway, they get to the scene of the incident, and there is a single man there standing amidst everybody. 30-year-old looking dude with a really scruffy, unkempt beard and really plain, undecorative clothing and a single sword at his hip, and he's beating his chest and pointing to all of these dead bodies. And so as Norimitsu and company arrive, and they see what's going on, and they see this guy, they hear from some of the servants that had been sent ahead to see what was going on. That guy over there with the scruffy beard, he's the one claiming to have killed these 3 men all by himself. And so Norimitsu's friends, wanting to hear more about the story and being nobility, tell somebody to go get the guy and bring him over here so they can question him. And when he does approach, they describe his physical appearance, and I find this very interesting. Number one, they say that he was not... Number one, they say that he was not good looking at all. He was... ugh. But what's interesting is they describe him as having high cheekbones, a hollow jaw, whatever that means, and an eagle nose, which I'm assuming meant a long, slender, kind of hooked nose, which isn't unknown in Japan, but it's not the typical nose that a Japanese person has. And then to top it off, they specifically describe him as having red hair, long, slender nose, and red hair, a scruffy, unkempt beard. Honestly, it sounds to me like a Scotsman or an Irishman somehow ended up in ancient Japan, in 10th century Japan. Now, obviously, that's ridiculous, but it does make you wonder. But anyway, this dude approaches these noblemen and he takes 1 knee, which I find a little bit strange. Normally, most people in Japanese culture take 2 knees, but he takes 1, so I don't know. Scotsman in Japan? But this guy takes a single knee, he has a hand on the hilt of his sword, and he bows his head. And they also mentioned that his eyes looked red, like he had been rubbing them all day or crying or something. Maybe he hadn't gotten a lot of sleep. I don't know. They just mentioned that his eyes were red. So the nobleman asked this guy what happened, and he looks at them and says, "At around midnight last night, I was passing right by here when all of a sudden 3 dudes started shouting at me and telling me that I couldn't pass. They came running. I stood my ground, killed them, and then left. But as I came back this morning to take their heads, because, that's how they did it in ancient Japan. You killed an enemy, you took his head, you presented it to your lord, you got good rewards. That's how they did it. Little macabre. But as I was coming back this morning to take the heads, I noticed that they were actually 3 longtime enemies of mine who were likely waiting lying in wait, English, lying in wait to jump me. So that's my story, sir. And then the story does also mention that as he's telling this story, he was pointing a lot. And moving his head up and down is specifically what it says, which I take to mean that he was actually just a really animated guy, that he's one of those guys that if you tied his hands together, he wouldn't be able to say a word. But the point of it is that this is just one more thing to exemplify and illustrate the fact that this was like a low-class, boorish kind of a guy. And the noblemen hear this, all of Norimitsu's friends hear this, and they start chattering amongst themselves like, whoa, that's so crazy. And they start chattering like crazy. Literally, the story says that, like crazy. Specifically, it says, Kuru yoni shite katari iri, which means they were sitting, iri, and talking like crazy. But Norimitsu was more than happy to hear this story from this guy. Because now anyone coming to ask him about what had happened, he could just point to that guy and say, it was that guy, he has the whole story, go ask him. I know nothing about it, sirs. It's got nothing to do with me. But then you might ask yourself, then how do we know it was Norimitsu if he didn't actually want people to know about it and he was hush-hush about the whole thing? Well, turns out that many years later, he began telling his children this story and that he wanted to keep it secret from everybody. And so, at the time this story was written, whoever his children were at the time were more than happy to share this story with whoever actually wrote these down. Thus is it said that Tachibana no Norimitsu was the son of Tachibana no Toshimasa and the father of Tachibana no Suemichi, who was apparently still alive when this story was written. And I don't know why the story ends like that, but that's the way that the story ends. Now, I want to discuss a little bit of cultural context about this. Why was Tachibana no Norimitsu so hesitant to take credit for killing these three guys? Well, there's a couple of reasons. Number one being, at least that I think, this is my own personal opinion, so if you have other opinions, please feel free to let me know. But I do believe that killing people is generally not a good thing, and even if in certain contexts one is justified in doing it, trying to explain that to the authorities is kind of messy business. And yeah, he was a nobleman, but there are limits to what even the nobility can get away with. So maybe he just didn't want to deal with all the fallout of that. But I also want to point out that at this time, being a warrior wasn't exactly super looked up to. Like, warriors weren't held in super high regard. In fact, being very skilled at war usually came hand in hand with the idea of being boorish and uncultured and filthy, unkempt, all of those things, like somebody who didn't live with the proper people of society, shall we say. You know, warriors weren't known for hobnobbing with the elites of the capital, who, again, love to spend their time writing poetry, reading fancy tales, discussing the merits of, I don't know, playing music all day, and crying anytime anything remotely interesting happened to them, because that just showed you how so sensitive they were, and so in tune with all of the feelings of everything going on around them. Oh, those silly warriors out in the provinces couldn't possibly be as refined as us fancy gentlemen. And so, in the story, when some boorish, unkempt, heavily bearded, ragged-looking dude comes and says something to the effect of, I'm the one who killed these three men, well, everybody just accepts it without question. Because someone who could take on three dudes at the same time and get away with it was probably more akin to a bear than an actual man. At least, that's what I'm assuming was the general opinion of the people who saw this. But that's going to be it for now. I very much appreciate, like always, for you coming and listening. Please feel free to like, share, subscribe, share especially, because I just want to get the word out. I would love for these stories to go to all the weeby peoples who would be interested in hearing them. And if you have any questions, feel free to let me know in the comments. And that's going to be it. And one more time, ito katajike no koso haberi kere. All right, thanks and bye.